Hey guys, what's going on? Blaine back for another Netflix review, and today I'm going to be talking about Tragic Jungle. Tragic Jungle is a Mexican dramatic thriller that takes place in 1920 and tells the story of Agnes, a young Belizean woman who escapes into the depths of the Mayan jungle in an attempt to escape an arranged marriage with an Englishman. She's initially assisted in her escape by two other people who go along with her in the jungle together, but they're quickly found by the Englishman's team, and everyone except Agnes is killed and left for dead in the jungle. Agnes tries to continue the rest of her journey by herself, but it's not long after that whole ordeal that she starts to fall ill and is unable to keep going, and it's not long after that happens that a group of gum tree workers working in the middle of the jungle find her and bring her back to their camp. Eventually, Agnes is brought back in good health, and the story shifts focus toward that of the tree workers as they try to decide whether or not they're going to betray their British corporate overlords and smuggle all the tree gum that they've been mining in the area across the Mexican border so that they can sell it at a much more exorbitant price and escape a life of poverty. So the characters were pretty basic in terms of their overall presentation, but I still thought that they were interesting enough that I was invested to see where their journey would take them across the Mayan jungle. Agnes is definitely the one that stands out the most, largely due to the fact that she's pretty much the only woman in the entire movie, and she undergoes a very subtle but eerie transformation as the group makes their way across the jungle together. It was interesting to see how her sexuality changed over the course of the story. She starts off being a pure virgin who's never interacted with men in that way before, and as she continues on with her journey, she starts to become more psychologically affected by both the jungle environment around her and the interactions that she has with all the different tree workers, which is what ends up changing her personality as a result. You could look at it as her attempting to run away from a life of purity and getting lost in sin as a result, which makes sense considering that she's lost in a jungle to begin with, as well as having been arranged to marry an Englishman who comes from a culture that was famous at the time for its religious puritanism. Unfortunately, however, as good as I think her character is, I really don't like how the movie shifts focus away from her all of a sudden about halfway through the movie in favor of what's going on with the tree worker storyline. Once the movie gets to that point, she barely says or does anything at all for the rest of the movie and exists as little more than a sexual object, which again, I like that transformation is in place and the way that it happens does make sense. I just can't help but feel disappointed at how little there was for her to do in the last half of the story. The group of gum tree workers were also disappointing to a certain degree. There's a lot of them featured in this movie, so you can't really be too hard on it in that respect, but they just didn't have any depth compared to Agnes. All of the workers have at least one unique physical or personality trait that you can use to differentiate one worker from the other, but most of these traits are pretty one note, and again, because there's so many characters in this movie, I found myself losing track of just whose name was whose at times. I do have to say, however, as disappointed as I was with how the characters were handled in this movie, it still proved to be a very tense and thrilling experience. The movie features a ton of excellent cinematography of the characters and the environment around them, ranging from aerial shots of the trees that show you just how big the jungle really is, to close-up shots of each character's faces that serve to highlight the different degrees of fear that they are all experiencing. And the eerie ambient soundtrack makes things so much better, as it adds an air of slight but persistent danger to wherever the characters may be at the time, and constantly leaves you guessing just what kind of threat lies in wait for them in the jungle ahead. The way it meditates with its characters and just the psychological nature of its story in general reminds me of another movie I love called The Wages of Fear. I think anyone who's seen that movie will agree with me when I say that Tragic Jungle does a great job at being a slow burn thriller in that same vein. As good of a thriller as I thought it was though, I found the story to be kinda confusing to follow along with and didn't always understand what was happening to the characters at times. One by one, characters die before and during their journey across the jungle, and I understand that they're in a hostile environment and there's all kinds of things that could kill them, but even so, the way that some of these characters die as well as some of the reactions to their deaths from other workers just didn't really make sense to me. I think a lot of the confusion comes from how the movie shifts focus and story about halfway through and starts to take a more supernatural twist on things, but I felt that the movie never really fully capitalized on that supernatural aspect. This half-committed approach to its supernaturalism results in a lot of characters dying in unexplained ways, as well as other characters reacting to their deaths with varying degrees of remorse, and it just made it hard to find a character to latch onto and root for. I will give the movie some credit though. I looked up the original original myth that this movie is based on after having watched it, and while I still think that the supernatural side of things could have been done a lot better than they were in this movie, I still felt that what was there from the original myth was very well represented and stayed faithful to the original source material. Overall, Tragic Jungle is a bit of a polarizing movie for me. Its story is very confusing, but I still found it to be a very enjoyable thriller. I'm still not sure if I like this movie or dislike it, so for the sake of this review, I'm going to give it an average score. This movie is definitely not for those who prefer faster paced stories. It is very slow and deliberate in how it presents everything on screen, so if you don't necessarily mind watching a movie like that, I think you're all set. It's rare for me to watch a movie that leaves me so split in the middle like this. I thought there were a lot of things that Tragic Jungle could have done better, but in the end, I still had a lot of fun watching it. Anyways guys, that's going to wrap up my review of Tragic Jungle. Thanks for watching this video, I hope you enjoyed it, and as always stay tuned for the next part, where next time I review part 2 of the hit French miniseries, Lupin. Bye bye!